Welcome, folks. Glad to see you all. And yeah, what a great group of folks we have today. This is New Hampshire Peace Action's bi-weekly conversation series. We're meeting on Monday nights, 7 to 8, tight conversations. Tonight, we are very, very excited to have Grace Kindeke. She's the new program coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee New Hampshire program and my new office mate, although we have yet to meet in person thanks to COVID. Former co-chair of MIT Library's Committee for the Promotion of Diversity and Inclusion and a member of the Staff Advisory Council. And I understand she is a student and lover of dance. We are honored to have her here with us tonight. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
And then Maggie, who probably requires no introduction for any of us, is not a stranger to us. She's currently serving as director of New Hampshire's AFSC program. Her work includes organizing, coalition building, and advocacy for immigrant rights, affordable housing, tenant and worker rights, and ending homelessness. She coordinates New Hampshire Voices of Faith, the New Hampshire Immigrant Rights Network, and is a co-director of the New Hampshire Immigrant Visitation Program at the Stratford County Jail. Maggie was a founding member of Housing Action New Hampshire and served for many years on the boards of the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness and New American Africans. She's worked for AFSC since 2007 and lives with her family in Dover. So as we launch in, I think, who would like to start, Grace or Maggie, talking a little bit about giving us an overview of what's going on with immigrant incarceration in New Hampshire and what the New Hampshire Immigrant Rights Coalition is working on.
So Grace and I touched base and we agreed that I would lay out just to refer to the title for this evening, I will lay out the nightmare that is U.S. immigration policy and its enforcement. And Grace will frame up the strategies for resistance and solidarity and a way forward. So it's good to start with the bad news and end with the power that we have, our demands, and the world that we want to build. And I think we're both gonna hold ourselves to kind of lifting up some key topics, and because there's so much to talk about in this particular theme, and then see where you all want to go in the conversation, because there are many threads to pull. And I wanna start, as I always do, by saying that the American Friends Service Committee believes we are not alone in this belief, but it is our firm belief that migration is a fundamental human right. It is a universal behavior, and it is our responsibility as human beings and in our various spaces of lawmaking to ensure that this behavior is safe and free and that centers the humanity of people. And that is a far, far cry from what we have had in this country for many, many decades, and certainly a far cry from the crisis situation that we are living in now. It's also important to say at the outset that the nightmare of our US immigration system is a bipartisan catastrophe funded with our tax dollars. Built over Democratic and Republican administrations and protected by all sorts of our worst impulses. What I want to focus on just a few key themes that have been in the news in the last 4 years, but I'll probably multiple times refer to the fact that so much of the infrastructure of cruelty that is being put to work in the era of the Trump administration was built in Democratic administrations as well as in Republican ones. So President Trump, while hailing himself as a builder, did not build the system that is doing this much harm. And the first thing I want to lift up is the U.S. orientation, and Mexico's as well, sadly, of cruelty as a framework for deterring migration. Since 1929, it's been a misdemeanor to cross the US border between ports of entry without authorization. But in 1996, in the Clinton administration, immigration laws were passed that made illegal entry to the US more of a crime, and returning to the US after deportation became a felony. So it's that groundwork of criminalization that was used to justify the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy, which separated children who continued to be separated, many of them from their parents at the border, because our government said that the parents were committing a crime and needed to be referred for criminal prosecution. And then the children had to be kind of dealt with in various ways. So despite the fact that over many decades, alternatives to detention have proved extremely effective, case management, housing assistance in communities, trusting immigrants to pursue their immigration case to achieve the benefit that they came here for, despite all of that being proven to be remarkably effective, the temptation to detain people without adequate access to legal representation, very often without any clarity around when they would be released, has been much more our policy, driven by large profits for private prison corporations, and such that we have in Stratford County and Dover a reliance on the income that these contracts with ICE bring to cash-strapped county budgets. So we also have a system where, while we have access to release on bond, immigration court judges and the government attorneys are insisting that these bonds be set so high that migrants are often not able to afford them, so they remain detained. This becomes then a disincentive for people who may have to remain detained while they're fighting their cases. It becomes a disincentive for them to pursue the relief for which they might be eligible. There are, Amnesty International did a report in 2018 that quotes our Department of Homeland Security Secretaries John Kelly and then Kirstjen Nielsen as saying in public that the intent of these policies was to discourage migration. So it's not, as some would want to believe, just a byproduct of careless immigration policy or a disregard for the well-being of people fleeing for their lives, but it has been and continues to be intentional. The US has been a party to international agreements protecting the rights of asylum seekers since World War II, but we're facing an assault on those obligations and on the rights of asylum seekers that has been nonstop. Pretty much every month, we're seeing new executive orders that would make it harder for people to seek asylum, that would speed up the process to the point that detained migrants don't have a chance to access legal representation or to prepare the cases themselves, which often requires them getting their hands on proofs of the persecution that they've experienced. We've seen denial of work authorization or extending the period of waiting for work authorization. So even if people want to stay and fight their asylum cases, they have no legal authorized way of earning a living, so they get discouraged. We've seen the imposition of third safe country agreements, which accuse asylum seekers of not having sought asylum in one of the countries they passed through before arriving to the United States. And whenever we see these, Will mentioned the work of the New Hampshire Immigrant Rights Network. I want to flag here that whenever we see these proposed rules, our New Hampshire network submits public comment often with the great help from Chris Wellington, a retired attorney. So we add our voice to that of thousands of people objecting to this assault on asylum. But case after case, the comments are ignored and the rules go into effect. Thankfully, some have been held up in court for a time, but that has not been a permanent solution. So throughout this period of family separation at the border, now we know that 5,500 at least children were separated from their parents, with devastating lasting impacts on them. And as we know from recent reports, the government has been unable to reunite at least 500 of them with their parents. In this period of COVID, we're seeing, I mean, it's impossible to properly physically distance in a setting of incarceration, putting incarcerated people, the staff, and the families they go home to at the end of the day at increased risk of this disease. So during COVID, became an opportunity to renew calls for release of immigrants from detention. We have not been significantly successful in that. Certain lawsuits have won the release of medically vulnerable people, but there's been no conscientious decision by ICE to honor the fact that people being held for civil violations do not need to be in a situation of heightened risk of illness and death. So ICE is being credibly accused of failing in every public health protocol that is required in this setting. They are failing to adequately report cases, to adequately test detainees and staff. The threat of illness by COVID has prompted many to give in to their deportations. In New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Civil Liberties ACLU has filed a class action lawsuit against the Stratford County Jail and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and has managed to win bail hearings for 15 people who showed acute medical vulnerabilities. 23 people have been released from Stratford County Jail during this time, either because of the bail hearings directly or because ICE knew the outcome, what the bail hearings would lead to, so they just preemptively released them because they knew it would be easier to re-detain them down the line if they did it on their own terms. There have been so far 6,500 cases of COVID in immigration detention and many known cases of deportations of COVID positive individuals to countries with very weak or non-existent public health systems and infrastructure. Our members of Congress have really not come through with any meaningful response despite multiple requests for their action. The entire delegation did sign on to a letter with a series of queries to ICE about the imposition of COVID protocols, but with no threat of response of any additional oversight or punishment for noncompliance. I will say we're in regular, because AFSC has been co-running with the UCC's Immigrant and Refugee Support Group. We've been co-running a visitation program at the Stratford County Jail since 2014. We have built a good communication with the jail superintendent, and we're able to, with others, with public health leaders and immigrant community members, to pressure the facility to halt all transfers to Stratford from other detention centers, because it was clear that several cases of COVID had been brought into the facility early on from other places where there were active COVID cases. We know now, however, that detention levels at Stratford are back up to pre-COVID levels in terms of immigration detainees. There's 90 people there right now, 90 immigrants, and we haven't been able to get access to them because our program is still suspended due to the coronavirus. So we continue to hope for more action from our members of Congress. I'm sure most people are aware of a horrific instance of medical abuse. There's widespread medical neglect in ICE detention, a particularly horrifying reports of forced sterilizations of women at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia in September. A case broken open by a whistleblower worker there, Dawn Wooten, who at considerable risk to herself told those stories and managed to get the attention of the House Judiciary Committee and the Hispanic Caucus, and they did take action condemning those practices and seeking accountability for everyone involved. So not only did this woman of color employee in the facility, but also the detained women themselves very bravely told their story and hopefully are winning some accountability. Just a few other quick points. We're seeing mass deportations of African immigrants, including a large plane load of Cameroonians gathered up in Louisiana and put on a deportation flight on October 13th back to a country that Amnesty International says they will surely face persecution and possible death. So despite a lot of advocacy to members of Congress, that flight went ahead and efforts continue to round up African detainees who crossed that southern border, sought asylum primarily through the appropriate protocols of presenting themselves, have been held in detention centers for 2 years, experiencing torture, pressure to sign their deportations, and now mass deportations. A New Hampshire connection to this particular issue is that there are a couple of Cameroonian people that various partners, including AFSC, our advocacy, helped to secure their release in the last few months, and they are being hosted within our sanctuary and host home networks. ICE came for one of them about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and because volunteers had been trained to deny ICE entry to the house and to insist that he call his attorney, and they alerted other volunteers who showed up in support in the yard. ICE was turned away that day, and this gentleman was not put on the October 13th flight. And another woman is receiving support in the Nashua community for her legal fees so that she can fight her asylum case. And the last thing I want to touch on, just laying out the elements of this nightmare, is so a lot of that had to do with ICE, but Customs and Border Protection is another arm of the inhumanity of U.S. immigration policy and its implementation. Border Patrol was first formed in 1924, and it drew a number of active Ku Klux Klan members to its membership. It has since ballooned to 20,000 agents now, with such a surge in growth in the Trump administration that there's a phrase that they would say, no trainee left behind, that really anybody just had to apply and they would be made an agent. So the screening criteria were non-existent. With over 60,000 employees in CBP, it's the largest law enforcement agency in the federal government. And there are multiple abuses of ICE authority at the border. At the Stratford County Jail in Dover, we met many people who were transferred up to New Hampshire, as well as to other detention centers throughout the country to make space for new detentions. And they reported freezing cold conditions, racist diatribes against them, very little food, sometimes just frozen burritos being thrown at people, being told by CBP agents that they weren't eligible to apply for asylum, which is not the role of CBP officers, denial of access to their attorneys. People are shot by CBP with impunity, including someone was shot just on Friday in San Isidro by CBP. It's not likely there will be a thorough investigation unless there's a massive public demand that they do so. CBP also has a record of rounding up children into hotels and having paid contractors oversee them while they figured out, their deportation flights. And as we all know, Border Patrol agents had been sent now to quell protests in the wake of George Floyd's death. So not invited by mayors and governors, the federal government is sending them to confront protesters. So, and their behaviors in those places are escalating the violence as they grab people and put them in unmarked vans and take them to interrogate them in some offsite location. They've also been known to disrupt the work of No More Deaths, which is a humanitarian organization trying to prevent dehydration in the desert. So that might be enough. One last thing I'll say about CBP, which relates to the New Hampshire context, is that we have seen over the last couple of years, we've seen multiple CBP checkpoints in New Hampshire. So a violation of our civil liberties as New Hampshire residents, but also that has had terrible consequences for immigrant community members, including Eti Tam, an Indonesian grandmother whose frail condition due to her illnesses and her claims for asylum were all made very difficult to care for and pursue while she was in detention for several months at the Stratford County Jail. And thankfully she has been released and is making a good case for herself. So I think I will pause there and pass things to Grace.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if I should say thank you, but that was even more horrifying than what I already knew. So I'm glad to know it. Grace, take it away. You're on mute.
Thank you, Maggie, for that update. Definitely with everything that's what's happening and has continued to happen over a very long period of time, AFSC and other immigrant networks and defenders are responding to the immigrant networks, defenders, and immigrants and allies are responding to these realities by building and strengthening community care and mutual aid networks. Through host home networks, supportive online communities, centering the humanity of immigrants and bringing to light the contributions of our immigrant siblings within our society, as well as sharing and calling attention to the devastating impacts that these increasingly punitive policies have on individual people and families and their communities at large. And so with the immigrant rights movement, we're calling for humane immigration policy. And what that looks like and where that stems from is that people's humanity, dignity, and well-being are not up for debate. And that is the starting point for our movement's demands. And so we're not seeking reform, although we understand that incremental measures must be taken so that people can be protected in the moment, so that we can move the needle ever closer. But our ultimate goal is not simply to reform the systems, but to abolish them. And so so we call for policy changes that shrink the system by advocating for legislation that puts caps on sentencing lengths, expands avenues for release, ends the use of bail and detainer fees, repeals our harsh immigration laws, and stops collaboration between local police and immigration enforcement. And we call for policy changes that shrink ICE and CBP's. Their astronomical $25 billion budget is always used against our immigrant siblings and our immigrant communities. And so we are calling for those to be defunded, to not be increasingly funded year after year. We are also calling for to use that money to invest in our programs, in our community programs and services that benefit communities, that actually help folks move through the immigration system and because of the ways that the immigration system should be, which is as a service agency and not a punitive system where people are punished simply for having or not having specific types of status. As we work on the policies at the federal and the state level, we also want to focus on protecting the life and the health of those who are imprisoned within the system, to support them, to improve their conditions, to ensure that they have enough funds to be able to be in contact with family, friends, loved ones, and legal aid, safeguarding their rights and health, both physical and mental, especially now during the pandemic, where, as Maggie has illustrated, a lot of people are in conditions that are horrific and lend itself to increased rates of transmission. And we also work to end deportations and welcome people home. So we also call for policy changes that center the humanity, the full humanity of each person, that center the changes that need to happen in order to nurture our young people. So we want to be ending policies and practices that also funnel people, that make it more dangerous for immigrants within the community when they come into contact with local law enforcement. And that includes school resource officers, and as well as ending those collaborations between local law enforcement and the immigrant enforcement as well. So we seek an immigration system that upholds civil and human rights and does not criminalize people for their immigration status. We call for a path to citizenship for the millions of undocumented people, humane processes for asylum seekers and refugees, and an end to jails and other environments of torture. So with that work that we have been doing, so much of it has been led and has been won by immigrant leaders, those who are affected by the system, who know what that system can do, what that system has done, and can speak to it because they understand what needs to be done in the world that we want to be living in. So some of those ways that we can affect those changes in fighting those unjust policies and protecting the most vulnerable among us includes lifting up and centering the leadership and experiences of our immigrant leaders who know firsthand, and for our calls as community organizers, as leaders, as members, to be rigorously examined so that we're not simply calling for the changes that we're calling for will not simply increase the reach of enforcement that we're seeking, that what we are asking for will decrease the power, the budget, and the reach of immigration enforcement. And so we are also challenging, by doing so, we're challenging the idea of what public safety necessitates. And so much of the narrative is that public safety requires increased incarceration, increased punitive measures. And we want to be changing that narrative because we know that when we are able to care for one another and ensure that there are processes and systems in place that make it possible for people to be able to be with their families, to be able to stay in their communities, those processes and those systems and those ways of being are what keep us the most safe. And so there are a couple of current campaigns that AFSC is working on. I spoke to some of those, some of that, which is the Defund Hate campaign, which calls for excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous. So Defund Hate calling for an end to the increased budgets of ICE and CBP. And so right now, currently, the Congress has passed a continuing resolution bill that keeps the government funded through December. And once mid-December hits, those negotiations will ramp back up. And so we are continuing, we've been pushing for this for a long time, but we are calling on our communities to continue pressuring our members of Congress not to add any more to ICE's budgets, not to allow special appropriations to their budgets as well. And we know that our members of Congress receive hundreds of calls from constituents in support of draconian bills that harm immigrants and continue to fund ICE and CBP, and that they don't get nearly as many calls from constituents in support of immigrants and calling for the defunding of these two agencies. And so we emphasize and we want folks to be calling our members of Congress, especially once those appropriations time comes again in December, to make sure that we are not continuing to fund these agencies. And the another campaign that we have been working, that the national AFSC has been working for, and with in collaboration with other organizations across the country, is the Free Them All campaign, which makes the link between detention, jails, prisons, and that when we call for decarceration of our detention centers, we are also calling for decarceration of our prisons and jails, because they funnel, our local law enforcement funnels into the immigration system. And so people who get caught, and as so often happens for especially our Black and Brown and Indigenous brothers and sisters and siblings, often will land in under local surveillance, under local law enforcement punishment, and then will find themselves, if they are immigrants, find themselves in under the thumb of the immigration enforcement system as well. And so I will share some links in the chat as well for these two campaigns so folks can learn a little bit more. But going back to advocating to our members of Congress, especially right now with how the devastating impact of COVID-19, we are in the struggle that our Congress has had in terms of passing appropriate and beneficial stimulus and support to our communities. The House has passed something called the HEROES Act, which includes pandemic relief for our immigrant siblings, but it has stalled as the Senate has passed their own version that essentially increases the budgets for ICE and CBP and other punitive measures, and does not, in fact, cover any relief for our immigrant communities. And so we call on folks to, as you call your members of Congress, to absolutely call in support of the HEROES Act. And then another local campaign that we are working towards is to support our immigrant here in New Hampshire locally, is to support our immigrant siblings to be able to get driver's licenses. And so when that comes up, we call on our communities to also call our local state representatives and senators to support that bill as well.
Thank you, Grace. That's just just a thank you, because that was much more hopeful than just hearing the worst of what was going on. So I want to open it up to folks. You can, if you feel called, you can feel free to ask questions on your own, or alternately, you can type questions in the chat. I'm going to open up. I have a question. We had 8 years under President Obama, and so we saw an immigration policy that is likely very close to what Joe Biden would do. We also have what he's said on the campaign trail about his immigration policy, and we know that President Obama, in particular, was known for being having the highest number of deportations as he was in office. What do we see as far as likely differences between what would happen if President Trump wins re-election and if Joe Biden takes over? Do you see a major shift in any of those policies? Of course, nobody here is making any endorsements, and we're all apolitical, non-political, nonpartisan, but out of curiosity, do you think there are substantive differences? That's a question for both of you, so take it away.
I guess I'll start just really quickly. So I think that, you know, whoever takes the presidency, the landscape will change, will be different, will be significantly different between one or the other. I think that with there is a possibility, there is an opportunity with the Biden administration to continue. And I just want to clarify to you, like whoever takes the presidency, our work continues. The jails are not coming down the day after the election, and we must continue to press for humane policy because, like Maggie said, this is a bipartisan problem. This didn't start with just one party and it didn't just end with another party, and they must both be held accountable because what has been missing and has actually been extracted out of our immigration policy is the humanity of people. And that as the humanity has decreased, the reach, the power, the budget of these agencies have increased to the point where their whole focus is not about serving people. It's mostly about keeping people out and punishing them. So regardless of who sits in the presidential suite, our advocacy continues. And so I think that to be realistic with a Trump presidency, because of what we've seen over the past 4 years, we know that the landscape will continue to be a very difficult one. Because of what the current president has shown in what his policy focus is, continue to be on, and that they're not necessarily they're not necessarily very interested in uplifting and in centering the humanity of people. Biden, I think, the Biden administration would create an atmosphere where advocacy would have a little bit more of a toehold. Where again, it would still need to continue. I think it's very easy, again, going back to the narrative of public safety, which has been used by politicians on either side of the aisle, and as a reason to increase to expand the reach and the power and the punitive nature of these systems. And so that there is hope there. There's a possibility. Biden has expressed, I think in the last debate alone, that he was regretful of the 1994 crime bill, which, as I think many of us know, contributed quite heavily to the way that the immigration system now looks like, in the ways that it impacted asylum seekers as well as those folks who are already detained and are seeking relief for their cases. So I think that there is the fight continues, but the atmosphere and the environment changes depending on who is in power.
And I just want to quickly add, there are a few things that President Joe Biden can do right away that will make an enormous difference. I think we can expect him to extend protections for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and TPS, Temporary Protected Status holders, so that they aren't just, right now, their fate is all in the hands of someone who acts only from cruelty and disregard. So he will be able to ensure their safety. I take him at his word that he will fight for a path to citizenship for 11 million. He can, with executive orders, roll back a lot of the Trump executive orders. But there's a lot of damage that's been done that is now really baked into the system. I mean, we're going to have a 6-3 Supreme Court. I guess we do already now by the end of today, right? That will be weighing in on immigrants' access to due process and their rights to appear in federal court. That's not going to go away. The placement of judges that this administration has done is not going to go away with a new administration. And as we saw with the last attempt at comprehensive immigration reform, Democrats seem to be wired to start on the 50-yard line, just giving away the moral narrative, the human rights framework before the negotiations even get started. And Senator Shaheen's own website continuously touts the need for strong borders in exchange for some, more humane policies. So we'll be up against really significant fights. And the only significant wins on immigration policy that have happened in this country have been with the leadership of the most directly affected people. Young Dreamers won the DACA protections that Obama brought about. So I do have some hope that our immigrant rights movement has really progressed over the last several years to a new power, a new sense of demand, and a lot more of us are coming along in beside them and behind them, saying, giving support to their narrative. So I am more hopeful that we will be better against the opponent of a Biden administration than we were against the opponent of an Obama administration, but it's going to take a whole lot of fighting from day one to win anything lasting.
Thanks. That was you caught some things there that I hadn't considered. I appreciate it. This is from Jennifer Smith. She says, can you talk about the latest proposal to ask for much more information from sponsors, including proof of financial ability to support a non-working asylum seeker throughout the time their case remains in progress?
Well, this is all part of just a multifaceted assault on asylum. I mean, sponsors have been, even as the Trump administration was trying to find homes for the children that had separated from their parents during the zero tolerance policy, begging family members to come forward to take these children because of the public relations nightmare that had come about. That all happens through our Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. Our Department of Homeland Security was reaching over to that department and getting the identification information of those sponsors so that then enforcement actions could be done against them. So you had two departments in this agency working together, as they do now in multiple ways, sharing data to advance the expulsion of people. So these increased requirements for sponsors, the implementation of the public charge rule that denies green cards to people who may need to rely for a time on public assistance, are all just attempts at denying people access to any immigration relief here. I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to speak to further aspects of that, or.
I don't know any details, Maggie, other than that we heard about, I don't know, a week to 10 days ago, that they brought out yet another proposal with a 30-day comment period, which I have not read because I don't think there's any chance that comments are going to make any difference anyway, but that it's going to substantially increase the amount of paperwork that sponsors have to put in, and the amount of financial stability they're going to have to show. And since we're considering sponsoring someone in the near future, I'm worried about that quite a bit, but we'll see. Yeah. Maybe we can get it done before the 30-day comment period is up, but we haven't made progress in the last couple of weeks. So.
Well, and the comment period is one thing, and then there would be time before the final rule. So, yeah, speed it up.
We hope so.
All right. Anything else on that topic? Are we ready to move on? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the topic, Jennifer. This is from Julie Zimmer. Who are the people in transition and being explored for positions in the Biden administration that are most approachable and likely to offer opportunities, and whose ear do we want? And I don't know that you have those answers. I know I don't know who those people are yet. So it's a question that we may not have answers to, but I'll open it up anyway in case somebody does know who's being considered and who we might think we might be able to talk to.
I can only say I brought this up on an immigration call of AFSC colleagues today. And our Washington folks just think we'll see a lot of folks brought back in from the Obama administration, that they'll rely on that kind of, ready on day one. Unfortunately, hopefully not just ready to re-implement their version of these policies. But so that's all I can offer to the mix of the wondering.
All right. So Nancy Piermont wonders if you could talk about immigration judges specifically in the system of immigration
Well, immigration judges are not part of the judicial branch. They are a part of the executive branch. They are an arm of this administration's anti-immigrant policies, and it shows. Sangyob Kim, our ACLU partner in so many areas of our advocacy, was talking today about how the judges who are considering the detained cases are now all, the newly appointed Trump judges. The system has older judges, people who were placed by other administrations, but they have largely been moved along, or they're not in positions where they are acting on the cases of the most vulnerable folks in this system, which are the ones currently being detained. So we're seeing their bad decisions, but we're also seeing them implement the cruelty of the 1996 immigration laws as well, which put whole categories of people in mandatory detention. So it's a combination of old and new that keeps people detained and having to fight their cases in a setting where it's very expensive to make a phone call. It's very hard to gather the money to pay a lawyer. It's very hard to gather the proofs that one might need, for example, if you're trying to show that you would qualify for asylum. So, but Nancy might have more that she wants to say to that. I know she follows all of this closely as well.
No, just wanted to emphasize to the group that we've got this minion of immigration judges that are it's gonna have to be a long process to get them out of there now.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So Doris asked if there have been any attempts to reform or disband ICE, CPB, and Homeland Security. Do we know of anything like that? I mean, I know ICE is relatively new. It's post 9/11. But have there been meaningful pushes?
Yes. More meaningful? I don't know about meaningful. There have been attempts to reform these agencies, but their culture resists oversight, resists accountability, and if the administration overseeing them isn't serious about weeding out people who are, even violating their policies and guidelines, then it has created a culture of impunity in both agencies. So I think you go, Grace.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add that, the Department of Homeland Security is also a new entity too, a post 9/11 entity that didn't exist before. And so I think that it part of the intransit nature of these agencies is in what they, so as much as what they stand for as what they do. And that narrative that they are keeping us safe. Their public safety is number one. They are protecting us from terrorists. They are, the frontline defense between us and them, as they define who them is. I think that, the part of the difficulty in making a real attempt to disband, let alone reform them, is really situated in that that exploited collective fear of what has happened to our society in the past, and what could happen. But it's very effective and makes it quite difficult. But I think that part of this strategy is in redoing that narrative and what does safety truly look like at the collective level. Because before the Department of Homeland Security, we had USCIS, which I think was under the Department of Labor, and Department of Justice. So, as the American narrative changes around who we are and who we want to be, we see those changes manifest in the ways that our government structures itself.
Thanks, Grace.
I put AFSC's abolished ICE in the chat. I'm putting in our action alert to cut funding for ICE and CBP. Just in case folks want to follow up with our members of Congress.
Great.
I will say, sorry, just tagging back to the Biden question. I have not heard a statement by candidate Biden that he will make significant cuts to ICE and CBP in his administration, but Senator Kamala Harris did sign on to a very important Defund Hate Dear Colleague letter that calls for significant cuts to those agencies. So maybe we can hope that she'll carry the day.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Maggie. Donna San Antonio, do you want to ask your own question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Grace and Maggie. And I came in a little bit late, and possibly you already covered this. I was in a meeting with students who are school-based counselors, mostly in Massachusetts. And they said they've been advising families to not take rides to New Hampshire to see the foliage this season. They've been saying, stay out of New Hampshire. So I'm wondering, so maybe you already talked about what's happening in New Hampshire. I know that for a long time, there's been the surveillance of highways going in and out of Canada, but I'm wondering if there's some surveillance going on 90, the places coming 95 and 93 coming into New Hampshire. And my second question is, if there are things happening in local communities where part of a local community can bring our perspectives and other people to the local authorities and start working so that there isn't that kind of fear of coming into our communities. So those are my questions. Thank you.
So Grace, I'm going to just say one or two quick things about work that has been done in this area, but then if you want to talk to people about how folks can support the anti-checkpoint, join the anti-checkpoint activities, that would be great. So this has been New Hampshire's reputation for quite a while. AFSC's immigrant rights organizers in Massachusetts would tell us that that's exactly what they would tell their immigrant community leaders. Don't head north on 95 or 93 because those New Hampshire cops are racist and they'll call ICE. And so work over 10 years with faith partners, with immigrant community leaders like Ava Castillo, with the ACLU, led to a long but thoughtful process with the New Hampshire Department of Safety, such that the New Hampshire State Police do now have a fair and impartial policing policy that makes very clear that their officers are not ICE agents. Now that policy is a significant step forward. It's not absolutely perfect, but it is a significant improvement to the kind of freewheeling racial profiling and collusion with ICE that we used to see a lot of, and that Nancy's and my visitation at the detention center would confirm on an almost monthly basis led to people's detentions and deportations. Coming out of that work with the state police was a stronger tool for advocating with municipal police departments, who were also, many of them had a terrible track record of acting like they were suddenly knowledgeable about somebody's complex immigration status and very willing to call ICE or a border patrol to get the matter taken care of. So the ACLU, which was good leverage for getting them to implement an improved policy. ACLU took the state police new policy, fixed it in a few places, and then convinced these municipalities to implement it. We just heard an incident 2 weeks ago up in Lancaster, New Hampshire, of local police following a van that appeared to have illegal aliens in it, was the write-up in the police report. And those officers called CBP, who then detained that handful of workers. So our in the lead is you really, if you want to avoid a lawsuit, you really ought to implement this policy. So that work continues on a town by town basis, and with local activism has won some definite gains in those towns as well. But there's a ton of work to be done. So Grace, Grace is part of a group that's trying to get the word out about how to respond to checkpoints when they pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. So checkpoints have happened. They're most often have happened so far. I've been working with Rights and Democracy, who have been really tracking this, tracking CBP checkpoints on primarily they occurred on 93, which is south of Woodstock at exit 30 in New Hampshire, and sometimes on a 89 southbound in Lebanon, New Hampshire, between exits 18 and 19. And so they don't necessarily have this information out on their website because it is a little bit sensitive. But if you are, what they do say is that actions that they take include making signs in English and Spanish ahead of those checkpoints and being with them, because you can't just hang signs from this location that they have scoped out. So they stand with the signs on this bridge in order to warn drivers that a checkpoint is ahead. If folks are interested in participating in that action, I can put my email in the chat and link you with the organizers who are working on this. If you are interested in making signs or donating materials or money for the organizers and activists who have those signs and are holding those signs up, I will share their Google form where you can just put in your information and what you're able and willing to do to contribute to that effort. But folks have been watching this, especially, like I said, Rights and Democracy have been watching this. It has been occurring for quite some time, and it's hard, they don't know when they show up. And so the phone tree, that's the system that they're using for folks who are interested in responding when the checkpoint shows up. They're texting folks, calling folks within that enclosed network to let them know when this is happening, and if you're able and willing to show up in solidarity to warn people, to go through the checkpoint yourself if you are a U.S. citizen. If you are more recommended if you're a white U.S. citizen than even if you are a brown U.S. citizen, simply because of the racial profiling and how they treat people. But certainly don't want to discourage anyone. But that knowing, I'll also share some links for knowing your rights before doing something like that. But the actions and the information, I will share that in the chat.
Great.
I should add that the ACLU of New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont have filed suit calling these checkpoints unconstitutional. So I just like to lift up the intersection sometimes of a lawsuit and people power and policy advocacy with our elected officials can be a potent combination.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. I wanted to first express my deep appreciation to both of you for coming and helping us learn a little bit more about how our state and our country deal with things. I know Nancy wanted to make sure that to clarify something from what she said, that a home provider, a host home provider, is not the same as an official sponsor, and she just wanted to make that clear from her comments earlier. And I, before we say goodnight, wanted to invite you all to come back every other Monday night from 7 to 8. The next one on November 9th will be Paul Kavika Martin and Lily Dragnev from National Peace Action, who are going to talk about what the elections mean for foreign policy and what our likely legislative battles are going to be over the next year or two. After that, we have Reverend Kendra Ford, who's going to present her presentation, The Work That Reconnects. And then 2 weeks after that, on December 7th, Jenny Walkup, who is one of our former youth, is going to present Perspectives on Anti-Semitism from the Only Jewish Kid in Town. And then they'll keep going after that. So put it on your calendar every other Monday to join us 7 to 8. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks
Have a
so
great
much
night.
for doing this program. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.